Greg Ballora is a puppeteer and builder who's had an incredible career in the business, starting out working on such projects as Timmy the Tooth, Muppets Tonight, Spider-Man 2, and Team America, through to today working on shows like To Ned and Ratched. Greg also trained new puppeteers at the Disney parks, so there is a lot of great puppetry advice in the discussion ahead. Greg Ballora is my guest on this episode of Under the Puppet. You're listening to Saturday Morning Media, and now, back to our show. Welcome to the show that is preserving puppetry through the personal stories of professional puppeteers. My name is Grant Pachoco, and this is Under the Puppet. Greg Ballora, welcome to Under the Puppet.
Thank you so much.
Very excited to talk to you, and I'm excited. You were on my very first professional puppet gig that I ever did, which was Magpie Time, that we did with Rick Heisman, where you got pulled in. You were like the puppet wrangler, and you got pulled in
Yes.
to be on the show. But anyway, I'm very happy to talk to you because you were there at the beginning when I got my first gig.
Very beginning, and with Alison Mork, and that was pretty extraordinary little show that really should have lived, shouldn't it? Now,
yeah, it should have. But let's talk about you. Let's talk about you and your career in puppetry. Not my first puppetry gig. Do you remember the very first time you saw puppets or were exposed to puppets?
That's a tricky question because growing up, you're just exposed to a lot of stuff, and certainly Sesame Street was huge because I think it came out when I was 5, and I distinctly remember, coming home from kindergarten and sitting down with my mom and having a peanut butter sandwich and watching Sesame Street. It was like the best thing in the world because it was a brand new show and it was terrific. But I think the first time I saw puppets and went, wow, that's an amazing art form, was seeing live shows. And I grew up in the Bay Area, in Marin County specifically, in a little town called Mill Valley. And Mill Valley every year had the Fall Arts Festival. And there was this guy named Bob Hartman. And he did the most amazing vignette puppet show I had ever seen. It was phenomenal. I still remember his Tortoise and the Hare as being like one of the funniest puppet sketches I've ever seen. Was the tortoise just blows past the hare in a hysterical puppet way. So that was really the first time I think I looked at puppets and went, oh, those are really cool. That could be a thing.
And were those marionettes or were those hand puppets, or what type of puppets were those?
That's a great question. I don't even know because my memory of it is so vague, but I have a feeling that they were Bob performed like tabletop puppets, I think. So they were sort of modified rod puppets, like what I call horizontal rod puppets, and people call them tabletop a lot now, which is a very nebulous term. But he dressed in black. He worked on a table. The puppets were out in front of him. And he just had a big brimmed black hat, and he would just tip his head down. You couldn't see his face. It was really great. Yeah, so those were probably rod puppets. And I think that's what made them really stand out to me, is they did not look like Muppets at all. And they did not have, that kind of general aesthetic of you need to get a hand into the darn thing. And they had legs, which was kind of cool. I like puppets with legs. They're fun.
At that age, did you start like, oh, I want to get into this, I want to do it? I mean, because you said you recognize it as an art form, but did you start like kind of doing your own puppet things?
I really didn't. I didn't do any puppetry at all until I got into college. And I went to UCLA and had I was getting a theater arts degree, and I thought I was going to be an actor. And I was doing a lot of sort of weird movement-based stuff, and even did some classes down in the dance department because I thought I was super artsy. And I was taking a movement for acting class, which was kind of a mixture of stage combat and general posture and just how to present yourself on stage. And there were 2 graduate students in the class, and they were both getting their MFAs in puppetry. So that was Lisa Sturz and Len Levitt. And without those 2, I would not have had a career whatsoever. Basically, I got partnered up with Len because I was the only person close to his size, and you had to do things, as a dual exercise. And Len was 6'5", and I don't know, weighed twice what I did, but he was a fun guy. And At UCLA, you would do a lot of one-act plays if you weren't in a big main stage show. If you're, acting, you would work on these little productions. And I had done mine for the quarter. And Len said, "Hey, could you help me with this other little thing I've got?" And I said, "Sure, I suppose I can." And I found doing puppets just really fun because it was so collaborative. And I really enjoyed working with a group. And those puppets were rod puppets. And, it would take two people to work a character, and you had to work out the choreography of that. And that really appealed to me. And yeah, they just kept asking me to do stuff. And I would say, well, gee, this kind of hurts my hand. And they're like, okay, well, change it. So I ended up going into the shop and fixing things. And that'll, that got me into the trouble of building a lot of puppets,
Yeah.
which is great. And also, yeah, that's kind of why I am where I am. So there you go.
Well, yeah, I want to talk about how you learned all that and learned building and stuff, but I want to back up just a tiny bit. You said you wanted to be an actor and a performer. Growing up, were your parents creative? Did they have like a creative spark that you latched onto?
My parents are both totally creative, just not in the same way. My father's an architect, does phenomenal design. He's 86 and he's still working as an architect. Has his own practice, and he's amazing. He's also a very talented musician and singer. My mother is a concert level pianist and just didn't really enjoy the pressure of that kind of performance. So she was a piano teacher. So growing up, I had piano music around me all the time. But I had an older brother, and he started doing theater work first, and then I sort of followed him, which I bet drove him nuts, but was very good for me. I followed him all the way to college, and I think he was like, "Oh my god!" And he finally got sick of it and moved to New York. And I did not follow him to New York. I stayed in LA. So yeah, my parents are totally creative, but not puppeteers at all.
And were they supportive of your pursuits in studying acting and that kind of thing?
Absolutely. They just wanted me to, do what kind of was exciting to me. I think, and you can't ask for better parents than that who support you in what you're interested in. And that it certainly is not a smart path to take to a be an artist, b be in the performing arts, and c decide you're going to be a puppeteer. I mean, I just think as a parent that must have been like a horrifying thing to hear. But they didn't share that with me, which I love.
It's like it goes from, oh, he's in performing arts. Oh no, he wants to be an actor. Oh no, a puppeteer. And it's like this spiral.
Yeah.
I'm joking, of course.
I mean, it's not a joke because really, from the layman's point of view, that's got to be terrifying. I mean, once you're in the art form, you kind of get it, and yes, it seems possible. But for my parents up in Marin County, they're like, "Wait, you want a what? You want a huh?" And then luckily things worked out anyway. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, when you started, you mentioned in college you started kind of building. Did you have any training on, how to build puppets, or was it just kind of? Did you have sort of this tinker mentality where you just figured it out yourself, or did you have someone who helped you?
I mean, yeah, everybody helped me. I think is the way it goes. I liked to make things as a kid. And certainly my father was, I mean, he could build a house if he needed to, I mean, maybe not now because he's 86 and it's hard, but I mean, he's one of those architects who actually, when he was young, actually went and worked construction. So he knew how houses went together. And so I was always around tools. So I wasn't afraid of them. And the great thing is at UCLA, if you're going to get a theater degree, you had to learn how to work in the set shop because that was just one of the rules. So, I had to know how to use a drill press and a band saw and even a table saw and drills. And, I was introduced to tools. But the great thing was they had a puppetry shop there at the time. And it was the great thing is that Mel Helstein, who ran the department, was never there. So very early on, I kind of I got to spend a lot of time there. I think I was the only undergrad who ever actually had a key to that shop, and I spent a lot of time just trying stuff out. And I worked a lot with Len Levitt. We did an animated film together. We did a lot of just puppet building, and his thesis production. I ended up just being a full-time builder on it. It was like my junior year. That was what I did most. And we just tried a lot of stuff out. And then you go, I would look anytime I could see a puppet, I would just stare at it and try and figure out how it was made. And Len would give me some suggestions, and he knew a lot. And then I would just try weird stuff. Like I think the one day I flipped him out is when I decided to sand rubber. He's like, "You can't sand rubber." I'm like, "Yeah, you can." And I did, and it worked. So there. Yeah, but I think in terms of building puppets, it was just examining every puppet I could see. But I think my best training in building mechanisms was keeping my bicycle running. In college, I didn't have a car my first few years. I didn't have any money, and I had this, Raleigh bicycle. This nice road bike from the '60s. It was super simple, and I had to figure out how the darn thing worked because I had to keep it running. And it was a great training in how cable controls work and levers work, and it just got my mind functioning on that level of, oh, if you pull this, that goes over there, and that's been really helpful.
Yeah. So you got into puppet building in college. After your graduation, what was your next step? What did you do after that?
I started working with Len Levitt actually, doing shows in. The first show I did was actually for Yom Ha'atzmaut, which is Israel Independence Day. Like you do, and me being totally not Jewish, this is all very fascinating. But I did a lot of shows with Len around the Jewish community in Los Angeles, which led to my first home video work, and actually led to the first series that I did in a lot of ways. But I just sort of started freelancing, trying to get work and doing jobs. And oh, the other funny thing was, as everybody did back then, you would sign up for a temp agency. So you could get, just sort of temporary work in offices and such. And one of them, I ended up working in like the phone bank of a big law firm. And what that meant is I had to take messages for people who were not in their office. Like for some reason, they couldn't record things back then. I mean, of course they could, but they had somebody to answer the phone. And I took a message from Marty Croft.
Oh my.
Yes. And the funny thing is within 2 weeks, I was actually working on DC Follies, completely unrelated.
Oh my
Just
gosh.
like it had nothing to do with it, but it was really weird. Like, wait, I was just talking to him on the phone, and then it was very strange. Yeah, I ended up building for a couple of weeks on DC Follies, which is one of the two jobs I've been fired from in my life, and I accept that I was fired because I really was not good enough to be doing what they needed somebody to do, and that was fine. But I have never learned so much so fast as I did there, working with Randy Simper, who was actually a phenomenal puppet builder and mechanism designer. He taught me just tremendous amounts, tremendous amounts. And I went on to use a lot of those techniques on all the work I've done ever since. So there you go.
Well, let me ask you, I'm going to spin off of this since you brought it up.
Uh-oh.
When as a puppeteer and somebody who's worked in this business for a while, there are always times where we get let go from a job, or we really want an audition, we don't get it, or we get recast or something like that. And I'm not asking for specifics, but how do you, as a person, as a puppeteer, how do you deal with that? What are your techniques? Is it like, it's for me, it's like, oh, I go buy a large pizza and eat the whole thing. You know what I mean? Like, how do you deal with that? Because that is part of the business.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, auditions are a very different beast, because you can't look at that as like getting fired from a job if you don't get the part, because that's
Right.
just setting yourself up to be incredibly miserable. And yet, that's probably why I'm not an actor, is because I could not stand the audition process for actors. I couldn't stand it. I was not very good at it. And I didn't enjoy it. Whereas with puppets, it was less personal for some weird reason. So, when you're auditioning, your job is to go in and do the best that you can, and then you absolutely have to go home and forget about it, unless you want to drive yourself crazy. I mean, and you can. I mean, that's an option, and most of us do it for a while, but it does not serve you at all to worry about how well you did or didn't do. I mean, I take that back a little bit. You always want to do well, but that's different from getting the part,
Right.
because as soon as you're on the other side of the casting, where you're looking at the people, you start realizing that there's so many other factors going on about why somebody is or isn't chosen, that it's not about whether you're good or not. It's about whether or not you're giving them what they need in that moment with the information that you got, which was not good enough anyway. And, you're making a blind guess at all of this stuff. And then, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So for me, I really do my best to go home and throw the sides away and then just go do something that I enjoy, which is, for me is probably building something, or, gardening, or going for a hike or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I guess I would add about getting fired from a job is sometimes it's the wrong fit anyway. And it's always a stepping stone to whatever you're going to do next anyway. Whether you keep the job or not, it teaches you something.
Right.
So my goal is always to learn as much as I can on any given job. And at a certain point, I also realized that I was always going to do what I thought was best for the job, and if that got me fired, that was okay. Because I felt like to do, and this was working for a man named Jim Gamble, who I had a lot of, let's just say, artistic differences with. He's a phenomenal guy. I learned huge amounts from him, but it could be a little contentious from time to time. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I have to do the best that I can. And if I'm worried about getting fired, I'm not doing my best work. I have to do my best work first. And if that means I get fired, okay, but I'm still going to do my best work no matter what. So that's kind of where I fall into line. And I worked for him for 15 years and never got fired. So there you go.
Right. Well, I was looking over your IMDb page, and I noticed that one of your early credits was on Robocop 2.
Yes.
Working on the robot monster crew. I will say that I have never seen Robocop 2, but
it's a good movie. It's actually really good. Yeah, it's potentially better than Robocop 1.
And so what were you doing on that film, and how did you get on that?
Well, so that was right at the beginning of my career, and sort of what I think of as my I did a whole bunch of sequels during that time. I worked on Gremlins 2, was like the first movie I worked on. Then I went to Robocop 2. Then there's Batman Returns and Stuart Little 2, and then Men in Black 2 and Spider-Man 2. So there's like all these number 2s in my life, which, was great. But Robocop 2, so in that movie, there's the iconic Robocop, and then there's his evil nemesis, who's this big, huge super robot that's much bigger than he is and has some drug addicted guy's brain slapped into it somehow, and he has fights with this big robot. And a lot of it was done with stop motion back then, but they needed to have like a scale version of it that Peter Weller in the Robocop suit could actually interact with. So we were actually choreographing fight scenes while sort of strangling and beating up Robocop. So there's big, huge mechanical arms on rods that we were operating. So that was, that's what that was. And we've shot down in Houston. So it was my first time traveling to do a job, and it was very exciting. And we're shooting nights all the time, and we would go do a scene fighting with Robo and then go watch them blow up some cars and things like that. It's really fun time.
Well, and since you brought it up, and since it's so popular right now, I have to ask you about Spider-Man 2, because didn't you work on Doc Ock's arms? Is that
yes.
what you were doing on that? And,
yes.
And he's back now, so it's all full circle.
I know, it's super crazy. And by the way, I meant to mention that the reason I got that Robocop 2 job was because of Lisa Stirs, that I knew from UCLA. And Lisa and I did a number of projects coming out of there. She would call me in to help on a few things. So that was one of the really great jobs that she asked me to come and help her with. So that we got to backtrack on that. But Spider-Man 2, that's probably the project, that's like the biggest job I've ever done in terms of like the amount of work and the period of time and the intensity.
and potentially the physical damage to myself. Along with just being like, part of like the biggest movie ever. It felt like at the time. I'm sure it wasn't, but it was so epic and monumental. And we were a huge crew. I think to run all the tentacles with all the electronics and all the lights was like 16 people. It was crazy. But I got to work the upper right tentacle most of the time. I was doing the basic gross movement of that. And usually Donna Kimball was actually doing the claws for me, which was lovely. We're quite a good partnership there. And that meant we got to do kind of like amazing stuff. Like I had to light Alfred Molina's cigar. So I'm bringing fire up to his face from like 7 feet away. It's just terrifying, And another time, he was supposed to take a shot of whiskey from a glass that the tentacle had just caught. And we actually caught the glass in one take. And then I had to bring it in really fast to his face, and he takes a swig of whiskey. And I swear I nearly knocked out his teeth. But it looked great. It looked great. He was wonderful.
You didn't clock him in the face with...
No, I hit him in just the right place. It's just, decelerating all of that tentacle mass was tricky. There's a lot of stuff there. A lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And, strangely, Doc Ock is back, but they haven't called us. I don't quite get it. I'm a little hurt.
I don't know. It's all CGI probably now.
Yeah. Well, it was CGI back then, too, which was what was amazing is we shot the whole thing practical. And then they went back in and like replaced a lot of the tentacle parts to do stuff that we really couldn't do. But it was a great blend of practical and CG. I thought they did a phenomenal job to the point where there are times where like, I wasn't sure which was which is pretty good because I worked on the darn thing,
Right. Yeah. That's a testament to you as a crew too, working together.
And it was, I think I worked on it for almost 18 months with about a 2-month break at one point. But that's a long time to be on a project. We're used to jobs that's like, hey, this lasted a whole week. Woohoo! It's a big deal.
Yeah.
So to be on something, it's the only time I've worked in SAG under a Schedule F, which is, once they're like, no, we're not doing dailies or weeklies. You're going to be on this lump sum, and that's going to cover you for this period of time. It was a new experience because we were on it forever. I think we shot over a period of almost 6 months.
Holy moly.
Yeah, it was really long.
A while.
It was really long.
Yeah.
Well, we started doing tests in the shop, and then we did tests at the studio, and then we went away and built some stuff, and then we shot a whole bunch, and then they were down for 2 months, and then we came back and shot some more. So,
yeah. Well, after college and you started working on these other jobs, you mentioned getting your first series or your first, regular thing you worked on. What production was that?
Well, the first series, I guess you could call it, was a number of home videos for Timmy the Tooth, I believe. And I got that because I was close friends with one of the writers, Phil Barron. And I had done 2 home videos, again, through the Jewish community previous to that. And it was really crazy. For those, we built the puppets in Phil Barron's garage. That was my first puppet studio. And Phil was just very supportive of me early on in my career. And so when he started writing on Timmy, I'm pretty sure that's how I got into audition. And I didn't really get the role to begin with, but then they realized pretty quickly that they just needed more people. So I got to go back and I ended up doing a number of small characters. But it was phenomenally good training to watch. Alan Troutman working was amazing to me. Watching, Michael Earl was also very influential at that point. I was really studying how he worked. Bruce Lanoil was on that, and Kevin Carlson and James Murray. So this is just really talented and good puppeteers. And it really taught me how to be on a set. And it's a weird group of skills to know what the heck to do when you show up. Like it's not just figuring out how to deliver your lines with the dolly. It's figuring out how to, work around the set and the other puppeteers and the monitors on the floor and how to get what you need to do what they want you to do. It takes a while to learn all that stuff. So that was great training ground. I then went on with Phil Barron to do a series called Alphabet Blastoff, which again were home videos for the Jewish community, but we did I think 8 of them. I don't know. And that was the first time I had a lead character. So that was a really huge deal for me because we were working with a lot of really great guest stars. Like who do we have? We had Dom DeLuise was one of them, Ed Asner, Elliot Gould, Avery Schreiber. Avery Schreiber, my whole world changed when I did a scene with Avery Schreiber because he was just such a great actor who totally invested the puppet with reality. So we did this really serious scene. It's like we were in the belly of a whale. I think he was playing Jonah, and my little character was, visiting Jonah in the belly of the whale for some reason. But he played everything for such reality, and it was such a pleasure to work with him. That was when I got the power of playing the truth of the puppet.
Yeah, well, I mean, and you had that acting background as well, and I think acting classes and studying just acting, not necessarily. I know I got in trouble with Matt Vogel of this because I said regular acting as opposed to puppetry, and I know puppetry is acting. But if you have that theater art training, it only helps your puppetry, to make it believable and make it real.
If it isn't, then it just doesn't work. I know there were a lot of people at a certain point who said, "I'm going to go into puppetry because I'm not really an actor," and all I could think was, "You're not going to be a very good puppeteer then, because to be a puppeteer, you have to be an actor. You're acting the whole time. It's just you got this weird level of technique thrown on top of it that you also have to deal with."
Yeah.
And it's different acting. I mean, it's weird acting because it's almost like doing commedia dell'arte style acting in my mind, in a certain way, where you have to indicate stuff and you have to show things in a very theatrical style because their faces don't really move that much, and there's only so much they do. So you're using all kinds of other tricks to actually get across what you mean.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times in puppetry, if you tell people you're a puppeteer, the first question that you always get, usually from non-puppeteers, is, did you work with the Muppets? And you did get to work with the Muppets on Muppets Tonight, correct?
I did. Muppets Tonight was, I think the first thing I did with them. And that was very exciting. Terrifying, but exciting. I remember walking in my first day there, and I just met Kevin Clash, and he says, "Okay, great. We got to get everybody on set. Here, take these." And he handed me, I think it was Swedish Chef and Sam the Eagle. And I'm like, losing my mind with these iconic characters. And I go walking onto the set with these things, and Brian Henson just looks at me, looks down, looks up at the puppets, looks down at me, goes, "No, no." Turned around, they took those right off of me and handed me. What was the name of the janitor on that show? Big.
Oh, Beauregard.
Beauregard. He was great. So I had to figure out Beauregard at that point, but I thought that was hysterical. I was like, "No, we don't need you doing those right now." And again, that's one of those places where you watch the real masters at work and you start learning how to do the job, how to really, function well on a set to give them what they need.
Yeah. Did you spend a lot of time watching them? Like, if you weren't in a scene, were you taking notes and keeping an eye on what like the leads were doing, so to speak?
I was always watching whatever I could to figure out how to do stuff back then. That's for sure. It's all about watching and learning how the process gets done, because it's so complicated doing any kind of television.
Yeah. You mentioned one of the best workshops was with Brian Henson. What sort of things did he say in that workshop that stuck with you, and that maybe you still use to this day, or what advice did you take away from that was really good?
It's so long ago, I don't entirely remember, other than Brian was the first person I remember who would watch somebody puppeteer and could tell you what was wrong with it and how to fix it. And I'm a pretty technical performer in a lot of ways. Like even as an actor, I was pretty technical, and I guess that's why I build mechanisms to this day. But Brian was the one who could go, "That didn't work because your eye line was wrong," or "That didn't work because you weren't listening to what he said there." And he was able to break down the elements of puppetry, which just knowing that that's was the goal was enough for me. It's like, oh, I get it. That's how we approach this now. We learn how to break things down so we can fix things. I think that's the main thing I got from Brian at that point.
Well, another show I wanted to ask you about, because this may be one of my favorite characters that you got to play, was on the Mr. Potato Head show. You played Baloney. How often do you get to say, I played Baloney?
Yeah, not often enough, clearly, because most people really don't care. They just don't care. And that was a really short run show. It was delightful and really fun to do. And Kevin Carlson and I had the best time because I was sort of his sidekick the whole time. And it was really ridiculous. That show, unfortunately, went away very, very fast. And the reason was because I think it was Film Roman was putting that together. They didn't own the rights to the toys. So they're like making a show, but they don't have the toy rights. And at that point, Chaim Saban had just taken over the company. He's like, "Why are you doing this if you don't have the toy rights? This is stupid." So they like made this whole series, and then it just went away.
Yeah.
But yeah, Baloney was a really challenging character because he had, he's like this just round stack of bologna with legs. And the problem is the bottom of your mouth is really close to the bottom of the body. There's not a lot of room to maneuver there. So you're riding the bottom of frame the whole time. And the technology of the monitor scan wasn't great back then. So it was really challenging to make that show. But man, we were laughing pretty constantly on that show because it was so ridiculous. And yes, I enjoyed being Baloney. He was a pretty fun guy. Hey, Mr. P.
A couple other guests on the show have actually been trained by you at Disney. So can you talk about the work you did for Disney training puppeteers?
Yeah, that was a big surprise that came. I'd mentioned Phil Barron before, who I worked with very early on. His wife, Michelle, was an executive at Disney for a while, and she knew a lot about puppetry and really liked it. And Disney didn't have anybody at Disneyland to train puppeteers, and they would have to bring somebody in from Florida to help them train their puppeteers. And Michelle thought that wasn't the best model. So she said, we need to have some puppet captains that are local. So 4 of us went down there, and we got to see the 3 or 4 different projects at the park that at the time had puppets in them. But the main one was called Playhouse Disney Live on Stage, which then became Disney Junior. There were similar shows in the same theater. And it was amazing you'd have 2 weeks to take a raw recruit, as they say, and turn them into a puppeteer doing a half-hour long, technically really challenging show that they then would do 5 times a day. And what was amazing about it, I was working with Tom Fountain, who has done amusement park puppetry before. I had never done that, but my time with Jim Gamble doing school shows was pretty helpful here. Training people to do a pre-recorded show is a very, very different thing from what we do on set, where you're handed a script and you need to go right away. They have to nail that track over and over again. And I would say that was the best training period for me and for them that I can imagine. Like, if you want to be a puppeteer, the best way to be a good puppeteer is to do it a lot. And most puppeteers flap the mouth a lot. And that's great. You learn that. It's important to learn to get your lip sync right. But they get so caught up in text and, what the puppet has to say in any given shot that they don't learn to work the puppet itself for quite a while. Whereas if you're doing a theme park show, you know what the puppet's going to say every single time because it never changes. And to keep yourself from going insane, you have to come up with new ways to do that text over and over again because you can't do it exactly the same way and not turn into a robot or a crazy person. So they spend all their time trying to find new ways to bring it to life. And they learn to work the puppet really well and with a lot of nuance and depth, so that when they get a script, they've got a whole bag of tricks that they can apply to that. And they also know that it's possible to have that level of nuance to their performance. So they shoot for it much quicker. So, I can't say how important I think that was. And I think that, as we look at the career of some of those puppeteers, it served them really well. I mean, Art Vega and his wife, Amber, I think is still puppeteering a bit. Alex Villa, Danny Montooth, Genevieve Flatty, Michelle Zamora, Jonathan Kidder, Russ Walco, and Andy Hayward are all people that I worked with down at Disney. And I see them fairly regularly still. And I love that. I feel like it's like we trained the next class of puppeteers or something. And, they're doing Puppet Up shows and they're doing all kinds of, Muppet work and a lot of really meaningful puppetry. It makes me very happy.
Well, another project I wanted to ask you about was you were a lead puppeteer on the puppet epic that was Team America.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I sure was. Yeah.
How did that, let me ask you this before we get to Team America, had you worked with marionettes before?
So I had, but not a lot on screen. I did live shows. So that was one of the other things I did when I got out of college. It took a little while, but I eventually started working with a guy named Jim Gamble, who Jim Gamble was one of the marionette guys around Southern California who did a lot of touring shows. And, I started off actually working in his shop, helping him build. And then very quickly he said, oh, well, we could put you to work doing shows. So I ended up doing, birthday parties and holiday parties and eventually doing school shows as well, which was great because anytime somebody just lets you, like, pays you to do puppetry, it's kind of a gift at a certain level. And obviously, the more you do it, the better you're going to get. And it was also really important to be in front of a live audience to kind of get the feedback, particularly with marionettes, to know kind of what they're giving you. But that was my marionette background. So when the auditions for Team America started happening, they're actually run by Peter Baird, who was Bill Baird's son. And I had met him briefly at Lisa Sturr's workshop, by the way. And it was funny because we were on a break from shooting Spider-Man 2. It was like that 2-month period when we were off. They started working on getting ready for Team America. And I went in and auditioned for Peter, and I didn't think I did all that great. But I was like, okay, good. At least I met him. That was nice. And I got a call a little later on saying, hey, we would really love it if you would help us shoot a test. And I was still working on something. And I was like, I can't. I'm really sorry. So Peter did it with Renee Zendejas. And apparently it did not go well. And Peter, unfortunately, ended up being diagnosed with cancer or something. So he left the project. So the first two guys on that film weren't on the film at all, which is for the tests. It moved over to the Kyoto's shop at that point. The Kyoto's brought me in to help them build controls and a few other things. Frank Langley was working there a lot, and he said, Greg, get over here. We need to make stuff. So I came in as a builder, and I designed the controls and built the body for like Kim Jong-il and some of the other specialty bodies, like Jean-Francois, the little kid. I had to mock up that body. And then the auditions sort of happened again, I think. And I was just one of the marionettists. There was no lead marionettists to begin with. That just sort of evolved because Stephen Kyoto kind of managed who was doing what, when. And I ended up just working a lot. And it wasn't until later on that I found out that I was given a credit as lead puppeteer, which was very nice. I was very pleased with that. But there you go. It was after the fact. And I did a lot of coordinating on that, as it turned out, along with performing.
Well, you also one thing that this is a little bit later, moving ahead a couple of years, but another thing that you were puppet captain on was Crash and Bernstein
Yes.
on Disney. Could you talk a bit about what your job as puppet captain on a show like that involves, and what you're doing?
I'd never been puppet captain before, really, at that level. So I was making it up as I went. And that show was interesting because it was one puppet character in a sea of humans. So it was basically, it was a sitcom that had a puppet in the middle of it. And that's a really awkward thing to do because the way you shoot puppets is usually not the same as the way you shoot people, especially when you've got, I think, a 4-year-old girl on the set. It's like you can't go underneath those people. There's no down, And they kept bringing in this really short furniture. My job on that show was the way I finally viewed it was to operate as Tim Lagass's spare brain, because Tim had so much to do and think about and worry about. It was my job to try and solve as many problems as possible so he could just be on the set and perform. So it started off as, man, we got the puppets from Russ Walco for the pilot. 2 of them had been built very, very fast because they had these beautiful puppets built by Puppet Heap, and they arrived and everybody hated them. And then they very quickly had to turn around, and I think Russ had like 4 days to build 2 puppets for the pilot, which he did, and they were great, based on some audition puppet that Brad Elliott happened to have, that they used for Tim to audition kids. Like they're trying to see if the kids could respond with the puppets. And they're like, well, that little stupid puppet worked a lot better. So build us a better version of that, please. And which is what Russ Walco had to do. So my job initially was to just sort of solve all the technical problems for Tim. But then it turned into, no, we need to build the puppets and build a lot of puppets and put together a shop on the set or at the studio to build, what was eventually something like, I don't know, 8 heads and 12 bodies and all kinds of different arms and legs. It's very interchangeable, and we built radio control versions of them and all kinds of stuff. So I would go to the writers' meetings, read the scripts, and go, well, they would call me and go, how do we do this? Like how do we make his legs stretch 12 feet? I'm like, I don't know. Let's go figure that out, shall we? How do we get his tongue to be, 7 feet long? He did a lot of things. And one of the great things that Tim kind of created and was sort of built into the show was that Crash would zip off the screen and then zip back on in a completely different outfit. It was very Bugs Bunny. It was super animation Bugs Bunny-ish. And that's why I just loved the show. It was very loose and very fun. But there was a lot of gags and stunts. Like I think our favorite one was Crash had to be inside an acrylic sphere because he was a germaphobe suddenly. And he's inside this thing and then gets a disease and starts vomiting purple vomit all over the inside of an acrylic sphere. It's like, okay, puppeteer that. Good luck. It was totally absurd. And yeah, we destroyed a puppet doing that one, but boy, was it fun. It was really, really fun. So yeah, my job was to figure out how to build the puppets, figure out what the gags were and what needed to get made. And then, talk to the set people and figure out what we needed to adjust there, grab the props, rod them or rig them for him. And of course, I had a great crew. I had Christine Papalexis, who's on almost everything I ever do, building constantly. Rob Saunders was originally just a wrangler and then became a wrangler and an assistant puppeteer. Blake Bolger was there as a wrangler. Kate Katz worked with us a great deal. And even Pat Breimer, I think, came in briefly at one point. We had some spare help from some other people periodically. And that was the first time I'd watched how a TV show went together, all the way from the pilot script into like sitting in the writer's room as they're trying to figure out what they're going to do for the next episode, and watching a script evolve through the whole Disney process, where Disney has quite a process. And, watching a show get made, an episode a week when you got 2 days to shoot it was pretty fascinating.
Well, that's interesting because it's funny because you said This is a show with one puppet and a bunch of people, and then you listed all these amazing people who worked with you, and I was like, wow, that's a lot of people for one puppet. But then you're saying, yeah, we had 2 days to shoot an episode, so it's like, oh well, that's why you have all those people to help you do that, because it's insane.
Oh, it was really nuts. I mean, we had one episode where Crash had, I mean, we had a scene where he had 5 different outfits on. And it's not like, if you got 2 days to shoot it, it's not like you can redress the puppet. It's like, no, we just build another body, load the costume onto that, and then swap a head into it. So we got really good at building what I call a modular puppet, where everything could come off wherever we needed to. And then we would mix and match it and, try and figure out how to do that. But yeah, we had 2 wranglers on set a lot of the time, which is nuts for one puppet, but it was actually really important. It was really important.
Yeah. Well, a recent project that you work on, and I watched this clip and it was just fantastic, is that you were one of the puppeteers in an episode of Ratched on Netflix.
Yes.
And I had not seen, and this is like a crazy scene, which I will link to in the show notes because it is on YouTube. But can you talk a bit about this? And you even got in, you and Kristen got in there at the very end.
Yes, there's a very brief clip of us. Yes.
Yeah, it's very funny. So, and I would just love to know because, and I guess maybe I'll say that this could be a bit of a trigger warning, just in terms of what this scene deals with.
Mm-hmm.
But this scene is kind of really out there, and I would just love to know your thoughts when you got the script and you're like, here's what you're going to be doing.
Well, I mean, the funny thing was, is I knew the director for the episode. I'd done a documentary with her, and I don't know, like 8 years before or something like that. Jessica Yu is a wonderful, wonderful woman, interesting director, fabulous to be around as a person. And I got a call to work on this show, and I was like, no, I can't do it. And they said, okay, well, could you just come to a production meeting and talk to us about how to do it? And I was like, yeah, okay, I can do that. And I get to the production meeting and they're like, okay, so when we shoot this, how are you going to do this part? Like, I'm not going to be there. And ultimately it all ended up shifting so that I did do it, but we had to build the puppets very, very fast. But ultimately, to get back to your question, it was the most disturbing puppet scene I had ever read. And I thought, well, I got to do this because it's just, and it's not disturbing because it's like really sick or twisted. It's because it was so real, but so upsetting. And what I loved was that Jessica said the scene was so viscerally upsetting, they couldn't do it with actors, with children particularly, because it involved children and it involves child abuse. And they're like, we can't do that with real people. So we're going to use the puppets to do the stuff we can't do with real people. I'm like, well, that's like super smart. Like, that's a really great idea. Yeah. And what an amazing challenge. And it is probably the most challenging thing I ever took on in a certain way. Like, we had to build them really, really fast. And the other thing is it's shot as if it is somebody watching a puppet show in 1940. And the problem with that is, usually when you shoot puppets, you cut and then you go in for a close-up and, you rig things. And Jessica's like, no, we're going to go from beginning to end on some of these. So, I had this, the paint is literally drying on the marionettes as we're loading them onto the bridge to go up and do this, of course. And we had a take where I had to come running in, turn around, yell at my sister, go back, turn around, open up a flip-top desk, reach in, grab a pair of scissors, brandish them in my sister's face, start to leave, turn around, scream at her again, and then stalk off. And I had to do all that in one take. And we're like, can't we break that up? I mean, come on. She's like, nope, we're doing it in one. I'm like, okay. So, that stuff was hard with marionettes, because marionettes are not very forgiving in a lot of ways. Marionettes have a little bit of a life of their own, and you have to kind of dance with that. So it was a lot of dancing on that. That was a lot of dancing. And yeah, it was really interesting to try and honor the material of this really dark show. Yeah, and just have it be, have it be good. And it was there, it's so far from the Mr. Potato Head show, for instance.
Right.
It's like the other end of the spectrum entirely. So it was a really great
Yeah.
exercise. And the
Yeah.
and the other thing that was really surprising, so we had to do we had to shoot the audience side of it. So we had Sarah Paulson out there. The puppet show that you see is what's in her head, not the one that the rest of the audience is watching, which is, you got to watch the show to understand what's going on there. But she's not an entirely well person. So the show that she is seeing is not the same one that the rest of the audience is watching. So there's a whole long bunch of takes of her reaction to the puppet show. And they shot that first, and they wanted her to have something to respond to. So we ended up having to do, the first day we were there, we had to do the entire puppet sequence, which was, pages of material and all these puppets coming off and on. We had to just run through the whole thing. And we're like, well, we haven't worked any of this out. And they're like, okay, just do it anyway. Do your best. So that was our rehearsal, sort of. And we shot the whole thing for her. And she was pretty phenomenal. And then we came back to do our side, but there's some weird conflict where the actors and the director couldn't be there the next day. So it was like 2 weeks later, we shot the rest of the episode. And my wife and I both had to appear over the top of the proscenium at the very end. So they had the first time I'd shaved my beard in about, I don't know, 20 years or no, 15 years. But they wanted me to look very 1940s. And so we did that. And I had this, I felt like I looked like Walt Disney, actually. It was a very strange look. The costuming was impeccable. But I had a full, the haircut and the little skinny mustache. And then I had to hang on to that look for like 3 more weeks because they were going to shoot it later. I was like, I look like such a dope. But it was pretty fun. And yeah, that was it was some very challenging marionette work that, and I look at it now and go, oh, God, I wish we could redo that because there's so many things that I could do better. But because we had to shoot it all in one pass, our whole scenes in a pass, there's bits of it that could really have been improved. But that was the way they wanted to do it, and it's always a big experiment. So there you go.
Well, I'll tell you, I did not watch the series, but in research for this, I found the clip. As I said, it's on YouTube, and I'll link to it. And it's it's a pretty amazing scene because you really never see puppets delving into this kind of material in the scene, and I thought it was very effective. I mean,
Great.
I'm sure when we all look at our work, we all want to do something better, but it's a really great scene. And the whole show, isn't that whole episode's called "I Got No Strings," which is based off of that. And I loved at the very end when you pop open that little hatch to look over the proscenium. It's not a close up of you and Kristen, but I knew it was you and Kristen. I
Yay!
was like, hey, there's Greg and Kristen right there. It's great. Well, we're getting close to the end here, but I did want to talk to you about a show that you and I got to work on together, and that is To Ned,
Mhm.
for the Jim Henson Company and for Disney Plus. And what I want to talk to you about is, I mean, on that show, we all kind of did a bunch of various things, but you were one of the performers who helped bring Ned to life. That you did a lot of that work down in the pit, as we said. But I want to talk about how do you, because down there were 3 people controlling Ned's arms, and then you
Mhm.
had Morgana who was inside Ned,
Mhm.
and that's just the body of the creature. How do you work together with people to make that performance, make it seem as if it's, because as I said, there's just in the body alone, there's 4 different people. And what is your sort of way to approach that to make that work and make it believable?
Yeah, 6 people improvising together was an amazing challenge. I mean, an amazing challenge. Some of it was scripted, and that really helped. But then the interviews would happen, and you had no idea where it was going to go when there was an actual interview happening.
Right.
Um, and you know, Donna Kimball was doing the front 2 arms. So she set a lot of the tone for what we needed to do. And she did that by, listening very, very carefully for where the voice was going. And, that was the most important thing. So Donna was listening very carefully to what Paul was doing on the head, and she would go over his lines very, very carefully when they were scripted to know where he was going to go. And sometimes you would get to run through the lines with him and rehearse it a little bit. But I was doing one of the back arms. Raymond Carr did the other back arm a lot as well. So did Geneviève Flatty. We had a lot of people come in and, the arms traded around a little bit, but I ended up doing a lot of the left back arm, which sounds like a dopey job. And I actually really loved it because it was so great to have to notice what Donna was doing and be sure to include that and try and amplify it. And originally they had this idea that we would somehow do what she was doing afterwards, just by a bit. That was kind of one note. And they're trying to figure out what's the body vocabulary of this character? How does a four-armed creature move? And at a certain point, I just decided to have more fun with it than that. And I decided, no, if you're a four-armed creature, you're used to doing four-armed gestures, just like we do two-armed gestures. And so I got really fascinated to basically whatever Donna was doing, I would often do the opposite to showcase it. Like if she was going out, I would come in she would look more out that way. And if she was going in, I would kind of bring it up and around. And the other thing, I got really fascinated by watching how important the elbows were in the back. And this sounds really weird, but he had this big drapey robe. And by moving the elbows, we were making his profile larger or smaller. And it all had to do with the energy of the line of, is this a big triumphant moment or a sad moment? And it was all about adjusting the silhouette of the character to match where Paul was going with the voice. So it was kind of exhausting to listen that carefully to all those people all the time. And when I say listening, I mean, it's like you're really paying attention really, really carefully to what Paul's saying, what he's doing with the face, where Alan is going with the expressions, where Morgana is going with the head, and then what Donna is doing specifically with the front two hands, and then trying to work with the other person doing the back arm so that we're sometimes mirroring, sometimes not. It was great. And, I didn't have any lines to memorize, so it was kind of awesome. But yeah, we had a good time in the glitter pit.
Yeah.
The glitter pit was fun because Ned's outfit had this sparkly pattern all over it that just rained down superfine glitter off of it for the entire time we were shooting. So we came home with glitter all over ourselves every day. It was pretty delightful, kind of disco.
Yes, I was in there a couple times, and you would have glitter for days.
Oh yeah,
everywhere.
You brought your Claude in, didn't you? Now you done
Yeah.
brought your Claude in there.
I did. Well, as we wrap up here, I want to talk about, you are still a builder. I mean, you're building just yesterday. You had to turn in a project. And for our listeners out there who are puppeteers and builders, I would love to know, does more of your work come from like advertising, or is it from referrals from people who know that you are a builder and reach out to you that way?
I don't do any advertising. I'm an idiot. I'm a horrible businessman. I don't even have a website. So I don't know how people find me, but thank God they do. I work a fair amount, but it's all pretty much word of mouth and referrals, and one job leading to the next. And I swear one of these days when I have some time, I'm going to put together that website. It's going to be great. But I figure if I'm still working, maybe it's not that important. I don't know. It's a very strange life, but I've been lucky enough to meet enough people in Los Angeles that I have enough connections that I seem to keep going. But I have found that if you're building the puppet, you have a pretty good shot at auditioning for the role. And if you've been working on it for that long, you've been thinking about that character, and you probably have a lot of information about that character that other people coming into audition may or may not have. Plus, you have relationships with the people who are producing the show. So if you can build puppets, you have a better shot at getting the part a lot of the time. And I'm getting to that point in my career where I really prefer to build the puppets that I'm going to end up doing something else in the show with. I don't just build a lot of puppets for people to go off and do something with, because I just don't, I guess. I don't know. Although I
Yeah.
did. I mean, the project I had to turn in on Monday, I had nothing to do with it, but I was helping friends, and that was good.
Well, and they, spending that time, spending that length of time building the puppet, you can make it work perfectly because you have, spent, whereas somebody else who's just coming in from the audition, they maybe have a minute with the puppet, you've had it for weeks.
Yeah, the great thing about building the puppet is, you always know that your hand's going to fit into it. And I always remember, some people may remember the California chickens. It was an ad
Oh yeah,
campaign, Foster Farms
Yeah.
chickens. So Drew
Yeah.
Massey and Terry Hardin did it originally. And Terry Hardin was working in the shop where they were built. And wouldn't you know it, she has a really tiny hand. And one of those chickens, it has an extraordinarily thin neck with a tiny, you can barely fit into it. So it was fascinating how she built a puppet that only she could operate, and she got the job. So good going there, Terry.
That's how you do it.
Yeah, it's a way. It's definitely
Yeah.
a way.
Well, as we wrap up here, I always like to ask, as the final question, Greg Ballora, what has been the highlight of your puppetry career so far?
Oh man, in terms of like, I think Spider-Man 2 was kind of a really big highlight just because it was the biggest production. It's the first time when they finally wrapped on the film, I literally started crying because it had been such a big deal, and the emotional just like, oh, thank God it's over. But I think the one that I'm really super proud of at the moment is a series of commercials I've been doing for a company called Eyeglass World. And the Mr. World puppets are really terrific puppets. And even though, Paul McGinnis is the lead on it, I get to assist Paul and do just really fun stuff. And the director thinks puppets first. He's a director who would really rather be a puppeteer, I think, but he's directing and he's great at it. Tobin Seaboard does phenomenal work. And we've had such a good time working on these commercials, again, with Christine Papalexis, Allison Mork, and my wife, Kristen Charney, and Shanna Blaney came in a couple of times. She's been really great. Carol Binion does a lot of the costuming. These puppets are so fun to do, and we get to do ridiculous things like skydiving and zip lining and, swimming with sharks and riding motorcycles. And this last
Didn't
one,
he ride a horse or something too?
a bull. He rode a bull.
A bull. Yeah. Like some crazy.
It was like,
yeah, we're gonna put a puppet on a bull.
And that was one of the first ones we did. And this is ridiculous. Like, wait, you want a what?
Yeah.
So Mr. World has been terrific in that Tobin challenges us every year to make the puppets better. So, we've done it 4 years in a row, and we build completely new puppets every time because the client wants them to be absolutely pristine. And they're like, okay, show us what you can do to make it better this year. So we kind of get to go back to the drawing board every single time. And it's been great. This last one, we did a lot of sports stuff. It was ridiculous. We had to have a puppet hit a baseball, throw a pitch, run and slide into a base. I mean, like really difficult technical things to do. And then he did some magic tricks. That was really fun. And he also played instruments. I had the best time having him play violin and cymbals and a timpani. And oh God, Paul and I had so much fun conducting. Having a puppet conduct this big musical score was so fun. And you do all kinds of specialty rigs for these things. He's got moving fingers that we put in periodically to, move and touch stuff. So yeah, Mr. World has been really the highlight of my career lately. And I hope we get to do more of that this year coming up too.
Excellent. Well, Greg, I just want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. I really appreciate it.
It's so great that you are continuing to, bring the world of puppetry out to people who want to hear it. You're doing a great service to everyone. And thank you so much for having me on board. It's really nice to be here. It's good company.
Many thanks again to Greg Ballora for being my guest. For links to some of the things we discussed on the show, check out the show notes for this episode number 66, over at underthepuppet.com. And if you'd like to hear even more of my talk with Greg, download the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android and click on the gift icon in the listing for this episode. Well, now it's time to announce the winner of episode 65's giveaway for a $50 digital gift card to projectpuppet.com. The question was, how long did it take Drew Massey and Mike Mitchell to develop The Barbarian and the Troll before they began pitching it? And the answer was about 2 years. And the winner is Shelby Kelly. Congratulations, Shelby, your gift card is on the way. This episode, we are giving away a Monkey Boys Productions puppet building kit. If you want to learn how to build your own puppet the Monkey Boys way, this Flick Beginner Kit is a great way to start. The winner will get a Flick Beginner puppet building kit in orange so they can build their very own puppet. To be entered to win this Monkey Boys Flick puppet building kit, all you have to do is answer this question from the episode you just heard. What actor was Greg Ballora working with where he had a breakthrough about playing the truth of the puppet? When you find the answer, send it in an email to underthepuppet@gmail.com with the subject line giveaway and you'll be entered to win. All entries for this giveaway must be received by December 15th, 2021. The winner will be chosen at random from all correct entries and be announced on the January 2022 episode of the show. 1 entry per household. Good luck. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Puppet. I want to send a special thank you out to all of the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who help make this show possible. Patreon patrons at the producer level and above who get a special shout out are Vicky Sebring, David Akers, Tony Urbano, Kathy Crawford, Eve Cunning, and Dorothy Pachoco. To become a patron and help support the show, visit patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. If you have questions, suggestions, or feedback about the show, call our voicemail line at 818-806-9604. Or click the Call the Show button in the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android. You can also send comments via email to underthepuppet@gmail.com, or you can connect with the show on Instagram or Twitter by searching for Under the Puppet. And don't forget to tell a friend about the show. Thank you so much for listening. This episode of Under the Puppet was edited by Steven Staver and features music by Dan Ring. Under the Puppet is a production of Saturday Morning Media and is made possible by the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons. Become a patron today at patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. And help spread the word by sharing your favorite Under the Puppet episode with a friend. Under the Puppet is copyright 2021 Saturday Morning Media Grant Pachoco executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com. Under the Puppet proudly presents The Adventures of Timmy the Tooth Reunion. In this almost 90-minute video, you will hear great stories from the cast and crew who brought this amazing puppet show to life. Plus, you'll see never-before-seen artwork and exclusive behind-the-scenes video. Under the Puppet's Timmy the Tooth Reunion is available right now at timmy.underthepuppet.com. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.